Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to talk about Commander Tough Rules and Cool Interactions, episode 42. Today's episode is going to cover when mana empties from your mana pool. I meant for this video to start out as a quick rules video, as I'm working on it at my arcade and my AC is out and it's blazing hot in here, and so I wanted to make something that was quick because I'm just sweating like crazy sitting here in my arcade. But as I was writing the script, it developed into something that was more complex, referring to timing of spells and referencing priority and things like that. So here's a normal Tough Rules video. Back in the early days of Magic, you used to suffer from something called mana burn. But nowadays, there is no mana burn, and because of this, cards that historically had a negative aspect to them, or at least a quality that could be considered risky, they no longer have that risk to them. They don't have that negative aspect to them. As if you make too much mana from something and you can't find a use for that mana, it doesn't really matter. There's no mana burn. Because of this, though, a lot of players may not be exactly sure as to when their mana goes away if you don't have an effect letting you keep it around longer. There are a few players out there that think that you have your mana all the way up until your turn ends. Not true. Again, there's only a small number of players I've ever encountered that think that. However, a lot more common misunderstanding is that players believe that mana pools only empty after each phase. And while that is true that they do empty at the end of each phase, there's also more often parts of a turn that the mana pool empties. It doesn't come up often, but for those times that it does, I hope that this video helps you out. For those of you looking to check out the exact wording on this and more information about mana in the comprehensive rules, you can check out section 106.4. During your beginning phase, you have your untap step, your upkeep step, and then your draw step. No player can take any game actions during the untap step, but priority does get passed around to players during the upkeep and during the draw step right after you've drawn your card for turn. A card like Braid of Fire used to be really risky because it could end up dealing a ton of damage to you over time if you couldn't find a use for the red mana that it gave you every single upkeep. Well, every single one of your upkeeps. But now it's just free mana for you to spend, even if you can only spend part of it and some of it is left over. You don't take any more mana burn damage. The important thing is that mana that it adds is done so during your upkeep. So any abilities that you have on permanents or cards, or any red instants in your hand or cards with flash that you can use this red mana during your upkeep. However, if during your draw step you draw a Electro Dominance, which is an instant that you can use to deal X damage with, you sadly are now too late to use the mana you got during your upkeep. But I've seen a lot of players try this thinking that they still have that mana until the end of their beginning phase. Luckily, for things that add mana during your combat phase, will typically specify that the mana doesn't empty until the end of turn. So this wouldn't come up for cards like that, but in Magic, we have ways to generate mana at instant speed during these steps in the combat phase, and we can also draw cards during certain steps. So let me propose a situation I see all the time that gets players wrong. Player A goes to combat and declares attacks towards player B. Player B declares their blockers, and player A can tell that, based on how the board looks, they'll lose some of their attacking creatures once combat damage happens. So they decide to sacrifice them before combat damage to their Ashnod's Altar or maybe their Phyrexian Altar. Player A has out a Coastal Piracy, so they know that they're going to be drawing some cards after combat damage is dealt from the creatures that did get through to the opponent. So their plan is to use some of that floating mana from the altars to maybe cast some of the spells that they drew into from the Coastal Piracy after the combat damage has been dealt. Maybe they have out a Vidalcan Orrery so that they can flash those cards out, or they just might draw into some instants that they would be able to cast during the combat phase. This is the mistake that I've seen a lot of people try, but sadly the game does force mana to empty after every step. So if they've sacrificed those creatures before combat damage is dealt, then they wouldn't have that mana around for when they've drawn those cards to hand after the damage step during the end of combat. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you have found the video to be entertaining at least. I hope that even a few of you may have even learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. I'm going to hopefully edit and render this video really quick and then upload it really quick because I'm tired of sweating in here in my arcade. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Have a good one. Ta-ta.